Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today I bring you a tale of magic and wonder and also Vietnam. Yes, it's the first appearance of Magicman. So this is Forbidden Worlds number 125, cover dated January-February 1964, which means it probably actually it stands at the end of 1963. And this is from ACG. Now, ACG was a publisher that a lot of comic fans these days don't know too much about, or maybe have never even heard of at all. But back in the 50s and 60s, there were a number of publishers besides Marvel and DC. Of course, there was Archie, but there was also Dell slash Gold Key and Harvey and this guy here, ACG. Now, the American Comics Group had been around since the early 40s, and it lasted until 1967. And they had a few flagship titles. This is one of them, Forbidden Worlds. They had another one called Adventures into the Unknown. But then they also had their two long-running romance comics I'm a huge fan of, which is My Romantic Adventure. Not My Romantic Adventure, the title is called. And Confessions of the Lovelorn. And they're probably best known these days for a series called Herbie, featuring Herbie Popnecker, aka the Fat Fury, who is this very laconic fat kid who has superpowers. So the Fat Fury was one of the reasons it became popular is because of the big superhero boom, of course, in the late 50s and early 60s. Herbie first appeared in 1958. But ACG was kind of, other than Herbie, was late into the superhero game. But here, beginning in 1964, the Marvel age is really in swing. Marvel is having this huge upsurge of sales due to the sales of their new superhero line. And that might have been what convinced ACG to follow suit, because they introduced two new superheroes, one here and one in the pages of Adventure of the Unknown, and that guy was called Nemesis. But here we have Magicman, and I thought I'd just take you through it because it's weird and wacky and really interesting. As you guys know, my father served in Vietnam, and so with the romance comics, I have a sub collection of Vietnam romance stories. But what's interesting about Magicman is that his origin story is specifically tied to fighting in Vietnam, even though, of course, as you can see, he's a costumed wizard. So why don't we take a look at this, and you'll see some of the strangeness going on over at ACG. Okay, so here we are, first page, and you'll notice up here at the top it says, Story by Zev Zimmer. One thing that's interesting is that ACG had one guy that ran the company for the whole 25-year history of the company. That guy's name was Richard Hughes. And Richard Hughes also wrote almost all of the stories across all of their titles for like the last 10-15 years of the company. And so he had a bunch of different pseudonyms depending on what story he was working on. Zev Zimmer is the pseudonym that he used while he was working on Magicman, but he had a whole bunch of other ones, including Ace Aquila, Lafciato Lee, Kermit Lundgren, Shane O'Shea, Corrado Asaki, and others. So he liked to have, and at one point they had little drawings, little caricatures of the people doing the stories, and so they just make up these faces like the Lafcadio Lee. I'm not even sure how you're supposed to pronounce that, but he's like this fat beatnik with a beret and a cravat. But anyway, here he is, Zev Zimmer. Sorry for the crappy camera work, but so we start off here the story, and here we are. It's the meeting of Chinese Red military officers, and the guy's giving this briefing. The story structure in this is really strange, but I appreciate it for that reason, where he's giving a slideshow, and he's explaining that Magicman is this guy that showed up in Vietnam and is trashing everything. And this is a problem because the Chinese have just set up a secret base in Vietnam, and they're bringing all their soldiers into Vietnam secretly to back the Viet Cong. And his minions are like, "Oh, those are fake. Those are doctored photos. Someone used Photoshop." And then Magic Man smashes through the window, and he's like, "Nope, I'm real." And he uses magic on them to force them to tell him where the secret base is. And then he right in the middle, after he does that, he's like, "You reader, let's talk. You must be curious about how I came to be, well, what I am, Magic Man. It's kind of an interesting story. Mind if I tell you?" And the story he launches into is fantastic because it turns out he's the son of Cagliostro, who is a famous supposed alchemist and wizard in the 18th century, and he was basically a con artist. Um, but he was like renowned throughout Europe as for being this alchemist. And so in this story, he was actually really a magician, and this guy was his son. And so when the authorities came to take him away, um, all of a sudden his latent magic powers kicked in, and he teleported away. And so, but he was like, the world hates and fears the magicians. I'll never use his magic. So he decided he's just not. He's going to forget that he's has any magic, and he represses it. Um, but then it turns out he's actually immortal. His magic powers make him immortal, and so he it basically stops aging when he's like 18 or something, and he just goes through the ages, just like never using his magic and just sort of schlepping along. And then, for some reason, in 1962, he decides to join the United States Army. And so he ends up getting sent to Vietnam. And while he's in Vietnam, he's like, "Let me put on the magic show for to get out of KP duty." And he's like, but he hasn't used his magic powers in 200 years, so they sort of go haywire. And it's a big laugh right up until his best buddy is murdered by Chinese communist guerrilla agents working in Vietnam. And they've also kidnapped a senator that was coming over there for a visit. And so he's like, "I've got to avenge my buddy, and I've got to do something to help save America." And so he decides to become a superhero. Here it is. He says, "A war's half won when you can strike fear into your opponent, and I've got to strike that fear. Just plain Tom Cargill, that's the name he's using, can't do it, but some mysterious avenger with mysterious powers who could hit out of nowhere lightning force could. I'll do that as Magic Man." And so then he goes into um, the theatrical supplies that you'll find in every army post. Which maybe that's the truth. I don't know. I've never been in the army, but I find it hilarious that they've just got like cases and cases of costumes lying around just in case they need to put on a production of the world's worst dressed version of Romeo and Juliet. But he just cobbles together this ridiculously stupid looking costume. Art by Pete Costanza, if anyone's wondering. And he flies out, and he uses his magic to destroy some helicopters, and then he blows up a dam, and he's just blowing up tanks left and right, and he's trying to track down the senator, and blah blah blah. And basically he does that. He has a bunch of tricks where he can just wave his hands and the planes crash into each other. He can conjure tigers to attack people. He's almost invincible, except for they hit him with a gas attack and it knocks him out. But just as he's passing out, he teleports away again to safety. And then for his big trick, he sneaks into disguise, flies the house away. This is a great sequence. The house catches on fire, and then the house flies into the ammunition dump and blows up the entire base. However, he has secretly protected the senator. He flies them to safety, and then he disappears, and he's like, "Hope you liked it, folks. See you in the next issue with a new great Magic Man adventure." So anyway, it was just a fantastic issue. I really love it. I find it really interesting that they've decided to explicitly set Magic Man's origin and the story in Vietnam. Marvel had a couple stories in Vietnam, like Journey to Mystery 117, and most famously Iron Man's first appearance. But for the most part, they kind of steered away from Vietnam pretty quickly. By the time you get to like 65, they're just like we don't want to deal with this anymore. And over at DC, they're not really doing much. So it's really interesting to see ACG steer into this. Now, this is cover dated January, February 1965, so it would have been on sale right at the end of 1964. This is right when the U.S. involvement is really ramping up in Vietnam because the Gulf of Tonkin incident was in 1964. So it's just an interesting to see the divergent thought processes and decision making by the publishers, where Stan Lee sort of started down that road and was like, no, it's the third rail. But Richard Hughes is like, yeah, let's do it. Let's have a superhero set in Vietnam. So this is something where it's just really interesting to me, and I'm looking forward to tracking down more appearances of Magicman. He ran in the series starting with this issue 125 up until around 140, I think, 141. And his stories have been collected a few years ago. There was like a collection with all the stories. I think there was one for Nemesis as well. And of course, you can get the Herbie stuff. But it's really interesting. And of course, ACG never disappoints. Thank you to ACG for making comics that are so fun to read. So that's it for this time. Next time around, I might be digging my Wonder Woman collection again. I don't know. We'll see. I do have also another single issue that I might share, which is an infamous story where Wonder Woman meets Jerry Lewis. So I might dig into that next time. But we'll see. Those are all on the horizon. But for now, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.